They became very upset and enrolled me into some type of troublemaker database.
You've got to understand that governments stand to gain from terror, to scare you into submission, to attack. Dick Cheney, in September of 2000, openly wrote a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, and he said, we need a Pearl Harbor event. The U.S. government wants to carry out terror attacks to blame it on their enemies. 9/11 was a self-inflicted wound. 9/11 was an inside job. It was orchestrated. It was engineered by rebels.
A few weeks after returning to the United States, I then read in the newspapers in horror that I had indeed been enrolled in a terrorist database.
The identity cards, the compulsory identity cards that have been proposed for the first time in our history, around about 80% of the British people oppose the introduction of these cards. And it's not just cards, it's the databases that go behind that allows the state to access private information and so on. And yet as a result of 7/7, it seems that these things will be steamrolled through our parliament. Wherever we look at the moment, there are assaults on civil liberties as a result, of course, of the so-called war on terror.
Similar guidelines have been implemented inside the United States. A Virginia anti-terror training manual lists property rights activists as potential terrorists. A Texas manual lists those wearing Levi's jeans, having cell phones, and who are, quote, friendly towards the police as potential terrorists. In Arizona, they list those that make frequent references to the U.S. Constitution as potential terrorists. All of these guidelines have been produced by the federal government and distributed at the state level. The federal government itself has told police to be on the lookout for drivers who have road almanacs or driver atlases. All across the planet, governments are restricting free speech and setting up so-called free speech zones to stop their populations from demonstrating. Months later, Paul and Steve Watson came to Texas and joined me live on my radio broadcast to discuss the aftermath of the London bombings. We are joined in studio by Steve Watson and Paul Watson. Guys, you've been in the United States now for about 7 days. How have you liked it?
It's been pretty good so far. Obviously, it's all Western culture, so it's pretty similar. But
when we were in London, I mean, there were so many facets to it. But what was it like to have the police march up to you and tell you to turn your camera off when you were just on a public street interviewing people?
Well, I mean, the fear-mongering at the time, we were there right after the bombings, 3 weeks after the first bombings, I believe, but then there was the second failed attempt. So the state of panic was still quite high, even though Londoners basically were apathetic to the attack. They just got on with their lives. They weren't really buying the government propaganda on it.
We had case after case where we'd be out on the street doing interviews with people, and we'd be showing the video cameras, and there were people working right there at the Hard Rock Cafe. And I'm like, look at these cameras. They're everywhere. They're in plain view. And the manager comes out and goes, you know, thanks for showing me that. I've never noticed those. What's your name, sir?
Charlie.
I'm Alex. Nice to meet you, Charlie.
How you doing?
Good. What do you think of the new symbol of the United Kingdom? It's going to switch from the Union Jack to the black surveillance camera.
Well, you know, there's plenty going on in London, so they need the surveillance cameras everywhere.
But, I mean, it's going to be the new national symbol, or of course I'm being sarcastic, but really it has become the national symbol. 4+ million surveillance cameras in the great city of London alone.
What to say about it? You know, I don't even see them now.
You don't see them? They don't exist?
No. 4 million in the city? That's the first time I've even noticed they're there, and I've been working here a year.
Out of sight, out of mind, huh?
That's it.
That's kind of Orwellian, though. You seem like a smart guy, but did you know only the smartest people in the inner party know how to engage in doublethink and doublespeak, where you don't even notice the cameras that are there? In fact, if you say they're not there, they're not there. Here, together, let's say they don't exist.
All right, they don't exist.
2 plus 2 equals 5. Hey. Hey, you could get an inner party membership.
All right, I'm into it.
I mean, that was actual doublethink. Steve, Paul, you want to comment on that?
Well, let me read a quote from Orwell from 1984. Doublethink is an unending series of victories over your own memory, reality, control. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously 2 opinions which cancelled out knowing them to be completely contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic to repudiate morality while laying claim to it. And this is exactly what we saw over and over again in London.
You've got a nest of, what, 6 or 7 cameras, and people are out there saying they've never noticed them. It's like, it's a survival mechanism to deny reality, but at the end of the day, it's not even a survival mechanism, it's quite dangerous. We were asking the attitudes of taxi drivers about the bombings. They were all quite ambiguous. They kind of believed the government line at that point.
You ever wonder who's really behind it?
Well, I've heard different. There's people who think that other governments are behind it. You know, British governments, American governments. People have said that.
Oh, really? You heard that some people think it's the government?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Really? How popular is that view?
Pretty unpopular, I would have thought.
It is straight out of George Orwell's 1984. This poor woman thinks that if you give up your liberty, you supposedly get freedom.
Yeah, well, we went to Stockwell tube station where they shot the Brazilian man. We basically noticed this woman who was working on the fruit stall. She'd been interviewed on the BBC, I'd seen her on there, so we went over to interview her. We were talking to her, and Alex asked her if she would sacrifice liberty for security. And she came back with, yes, I'll sacrifice liberty for freedom.
I think people should give up their liberty for freedom.
Liberty and freedom are the same thing. We then asked her again to clarify, just in case she made a mistake, and she said the same thing again. She was willing to give up liberty for freedom, which is really, it's direct doublethink, because the two things mean the same thing.
We found the same mindset in Crawford, Texas, outside Bush's ranch, that we witnessed in England. Populations who are willfully ignorant, who revel in being lied to. Well, we're on our way out to Crawford, where President Bush is vacationing for 5 weeks. He spent about a fourth of his time in the administration out here at his Hollywood set. Though he admittedly is afraid of horses and cows and many other forms of wildlife, and of course he was born in Kennebunkport, Maine, and spent most of his life there, he likes to put on a cowboy hat and a big belt buckle and strut around. He meets with all these different world leaders and decides to, basically how to carve up the world. He meets with the Saudi leaders and holds hands with them. He meets with Ariel Sharon. He meets with leaders from all over the world, but he certainly doesn't meet with the mothers of dead soldiers.
They don't have any skin in the game, so it's easy for them to say, let's keep our troops over there, let's complete the mission, even though we don't even know what the mission is.
That's really a theme, that we got to get them before they get us. Do you think Iraq attacked us on 9/11?
Maybe not Iraq itself, but the belief in the cause that those people have did. Yeah, absolutely.
15 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. Bush is out at his ranch holding hands with the royal princes, but then we've got to go into Iraq. No, I mean, seriously, sir, it's a serious issue.
I know where you're going.
Where do you think we're coming from, though, sir? I mean, tell me.
A lot of you are trying to connect this, we're in bed with Saudi Arabia BS, and this is all a big farce to get Saudi oil and all that. That's not what it's about.
So our government isn't in bed with Saudi, okay. While in Crawford, we ran into Ray McGovern and spoke with him about Iraq. Ray McGovern is a retired, senior-level CIA analyst whose career spanned the administrations of John F. Kennedy to George H.W. Bush. His duties included chairing national intelligence estimates and preparing the president's daily brief.
I believe that they are still interested in permanent military bases there. I believe they are still interested in controlling the oil from that part of the world. And so it will be stay the course. It will be 6, 7, 8 U.S. troops killed every day or every week. And what's below the surface here was revealed to me by a very well-heeled gentleman who came up to me after a speech I made outside of Milwaukee in a very affluent suburb. He said, "Mr. McGovern, get real. I mean, what's your problem?" He said, you don't have any problem with, you don't deny that we need the oil, do you? And I said, no. He said, well, 6, 7, 8, 10 Marines a week for the oil. You have to admit that's a very, very cheap price for the oil. I said to him, how do I handle this? I said, well, the utilitarian argument is probably the best. I object to it, said I,